Hi folks, I'm Larry Taylor, and I want to welcome you to this video series in which I plan to talk about getting unstuck in life. There are any number of ways that we get stuck, and I'd like to think of it as in terms of a metaphor, of a little story. So I invite you to use your imagination and picture, if you would, a hiker. Let's make it you. You're a serious backcountry hiker. I'm not talking about somebody that just walks around the block or somebody that, strolls up a bike trail or something. I'm talking about someone who's really serious about getting into the mountains and hiking. So backcountry, Yosemite or Yellowstone or wherever. So you've got your gear, you've got your backpack, and you've got the proper clothing and the proper hat, and of course your good thick socks and your hiking boots. And you're hiking by yourself through the backcountry, and somehow you get off the trail. Maybe you meant to because you heard a bird call that you wanted to go explore and see what it was. Or maybe it was inadvertent, it doesn't matter. But anyway, somehow you got off the trail. Not a big deal because you're an experienced backpacker and you have a map of the area that you got at the ranger station. You've got your compass and you're used to this kind of thing. So that in itself is not really a problem. But the problem occurs because you stumble over a rock or perhaps a root of a tree that's exposed or something. And as you stumble into some very, very thick, deep mud. And the mud, you sink immediately down to, let's say, to your shins. Not quite up to your knees, but you're in there. And you're really stuck. You try immediately to pull a leg out, and it doesn't move. You try the other one. You try harder. It doesn't move. You are stuck in there. And at first you feel a wave of panic, but then you take a deep breath and calm yourself down, and you stop and think for a moment. And then it occurs to you a way that you might be able to get out. You gaze around, you notice that there's what looks like a sturdy branch extending above you, horizontally above you. And of course, because you're an experienced backcountry hiker, you have a rope in your backpack. So very carefully, so as not to drop the backpack into the mud, you transfer it from your back to your chest. So now you're wearing the backpack backwards. And you then open the backpack, you take the rope out. You think for a minute, is there anything else in this backpack that I'm going to need at the moment? You decide that the only thing that you might need is your knife that you carry with you all the time when you're backpacking. And you decide to use that as a weight. So you lash that knife to the one end of the rope, and then carefully you take off the backpack, and you are careful to toss it far enough away so that it doesn't sink in the mud, so that it's safe. And then with your rope that is weighted on one end, you toss it up, trying to loop it over the branch. And you miss a couple of times, but you keep trying. And on the third or fourth try, sure enough, it loops right over the branch just like you had hoped it would. And because it's weighted, it comes down on the other side. It doesn't just stay up on the branch. It comes down on the other side. You can feed out the rope and let it come down as far as you want it to. And then with one of your hiking poles, you're able to reach the rope and pull it into yourself. Now your spirits are really lifted up because you realize that this is probably going to work. You unlash the knife, put it back in its sheath. You take the rope, you tie it around your under your arms, the upper part of your chest. You secure it with a bowline, which is the toughest knot you can tie, and easy to tie even with one hand. And then with that firmly secure, you take the other side of the rope, the other end of the rope, and you begin to pull on it. And you pull with all your might. And as you're pulling with all your might, you are lifting one of your legs with all the strength that you have in your leg and hip and lower body. And sure enough, it begins to move. That mud that had sucked you down, that mud that was sucking so hard against you and holding you there, is now giving way. You can feel it. Your foot is coming out. And that gives you a shot of adrenaline. You pull even harder and give it all you've got. And sure enough, your leg comes free. And then with another big tug, the other leg comes free. And you're able then to stretch out and step out of this mud that had held you down. You're unstuck. It's great to be unstuck. And probably you sit down for a few minutes and just you're grateful. You're just giving thanks. You're just breathing easier, and there's a great sense of relief because you're unstuck. And of course, you could trudge on just like that, but there is something that you're not stuck anymore, but there's something still that is radically slowing you down, or would if you tried to hike, and that is that your boots and lower legs are caked with this thick, heavy mud. So recognizing that, of course, you sit down back against a tree perhaps, and you take off your boots and you peel off your socks. Of course, you have another pair of socks because you're an experienced hiker. And you wipe off your legs as best you can. You put on the clean pair of socks. You shake off the socks that were full of mud as best you can. And then you begin a rather long process, relatively speaking, of getting the mud off your boots. Sure, some of it you can knock off, bang them against a tree or something, but this is really thick mud. A lot of it you have to take a stick and you have to scrape and scrape and scrape and dig, and it takes some work. Yeah, you're making progress. You know it's going to be okay. Maybe eat a granola bar to give yourself a little more energy after all that. But eventually, with a lot of stick-to-itiveness, you get the mud off your boots. Now you can put them back on, lace them back up, and now you can hike unhindered. You're not only unstuck, but you're unhindered. And so it's time to move. You don't just stand there. You don't just remain there, gazing at the mud pit that you were once in and saying, well, I'm not in that mud pit anymore. You don't just stand there gazing at your feet saying, I'm glad I'm not caked with mud anymore. You move. You resume your hike. You get out your compass, you find your way back to the trail, and you continue on. And this time you continue on with a new sense of victory, a new lightness about you. You realize that you had a close call, and you're grateful, and you're happy, and your senses are perked up, and you're noticing more things than you did before. You're noticing more subtle bird calls and ruffles of leaves, and as you make your way back down the mountain, you're noticing the creeks and the streams and so forth. You're noticing wildlife that you might not have noticed previously. You're grateful, and you've learned a lesson. You're reminding yourself on the way back down more than once, never to hike alone. That's rule number 1. And you violated it, and you realize that had you not violated it, it wouldn't have been that difficult because your friend could have pulled you out. So you're making resolutions, too, about how you're going to do things differently in the future. You're going to make sure you have all the equipment. You're going to be more careful to stay on the trail, and you're going to hike with somebody else. And because you're so grateful, maybe after you get down off the mountain, you think, I'd really like to help people who get themselves in difficult situations in the wilderness. And so perhaps as a result of your experience, you join a search and rescue team, and you take the appropriate courses, and you go to those guys practice a lot. And then you have the joy of not only being unstuck, not only being unhindered, not only being able to hike again, but you have the joy of helping others. And you have a real heart to help others who get in similar situations because you've been in a tough situation. Now, none of their situations most likely are exactly like yours. The rescues that you're involved in, maybe somebody, slipped and fell off a cliff and broke a leg, and you have to rappel down and splint the leg and get them on a stretcher and hoisted back up, and then carried to a place where they can be airlifted to a hospital. But what a good feeling you have because a fellow naturalist, a fellow explorer was in trouble just like you were, and you were able to be of help to them. So you've gotten unstuck, you've knocked off the mud that hindered you, you've moved on down the path with a new sense of joy, and you have translated that negative experience into a positive experience. Now you're helping others. That's what this series of videos is all about. There are many, many ways to get stuck. Might be addictions, might be relationships, might be something which has caused a crisis of faith. It might be the loss of a loved one. Could be any number of things. But most of us, at some point in our lives, get stuck. We get spiritually stuck. We get emotionally stuck. And sometimes we need help. Probably we have to do most of the work ourselves. The tossing of the rope, the pulling, the physical effort to get those legs out of the mud, the tediousness of getting the mud off the boots. A lot of the work we have to do ourselves. But on the other hand, there are also people who will help us. spiritual guides, pastors, chaplains, life coaches, therapists. These are all people who are there to give us a hand, because sometimes we really need that. Fell down the cliff, broke a leg. Can't get out of this one on my own, need some help. And there's no shame in that, certainly. So I invite you to enter with me into this series that I'm calling Unstuck.